Hello, today I'm going to show you how to do this problem, which is a problem that I made up, but it's modeled very closely after a similar problem that I found on an official SAT practice test. The first step I'm going to take to solve this problem is just to read it through and figure out what is the information I am being given and what am I being asked to find. I'm going to go through and I'm going to underline everything that seems important. So the first thing this problem tells us is that the graph of a linear function, so I know a linear function is basically just a line, so I'm just going to replace that word with the word line. So there's a graph of a line, f, that passes through the points 0a and b0. Now I'm looking here, it seems like in this point we know that the x-coordinate is 0 and we don't know what the y-coordinate is. But because this x-coordinate is 0, we know that it is somewhere along the y-axis. And for b0, we don't know what the x-coordinate is, but we do know that the y-coordinate is 0, which means that it is somewhere along the x-axis. Great, so the line seems to pass through the y-axis and the x-axis. The next thing we learn is that a plus b equals 0. That seems important, so I'm going to underline it. And neither a nor b equals 0. So that means I look back and I say this a, the place where f passes through the y-axis, can equal 0. So that means that this line doesn't pass through the point 0, 0. This cannot be 0, 0. And same here, this point where line f passes through the x-axis, that also cannot be 0, 0. Great. And then it asks us, which of the following statements is true about the graph of f? So we know this question has something to do with the graph of f, but we don't know what specifically they're asking us about that graph. To figure out, we're going to have to read the answers. So answer 1, its slope is undefined. Okay, so they're asking us about the slope of this line. And hey, I know what lines with undefined slope look like. They're vertical. Just going to do a little drawing here. And if a line has a slope that's undefined, we know it's going to go straight up and down. It's going to be vertical. Could be over here, could be over there. We don't know where it is. We just know it's vertical. B, its slope is negative. Okay, so I know what lines with negative slope look like. If you move from left to right, they're going to trend downwards. The y is getting smaller as the x is getting bigger. Option C, its slope is positive. Well, lines with a positive slope are basically just the opposite of lines with a negative slope. As you go from left to right, they trend upward, and the x's get bigger as the y's get bigger. And D, the slope is 0. So I know that if a line has a slope of 0, it's basically just going to be horizontal. It's going to be flat. It's not going to move up or down at all. And again, knowing the slope of a line doesn't tell us where it is on the graph, so a line with slope 0 could be up here in the positive y's or down here in the negative y's. So now that I understand what all of these choices mean, I can go back to the problem and figure out if the information they give us up here will allow us to eliminate any of the choices down here. Now the first piece of information that this problem tells us is that there is a line f that passes through a point on the y-axis and a point on the x-axis. And neither one of these points is 0, 0. Now, just using this information, I am able to eliminate 2 of these choices down here. And I would challenge you to pause the video at this point and see if you can figure out on your own which 2 choices we can eliminate. 3, 2, 1. Okay. The choices that I eliminated were A and D. And I eliminated A because the one thing we know about F is that it has to go through the y and the x-axis somewhere other than 0, 0. And if I look at this line with an undefined slope, it's vertical. And it's never going to pass through the y-axis. It's just going to go parallel to it forever. The only possible way that I could have a vertical line that goes through the y-axis is if it was right on top of the y-axis. And I can see if that was true, then the only place it would pass through that x-axis would be at 0, 0. And I already know it doesn't pass through the x-axis at 0, 0. It passes through at B, wherever that is. So that's out. The other choice I could eliminate was D, because again, I know that F has to pass through the x and the y axes somewhere other than 0, 0. And a line with a slope of 0 would be horizontal and it would go parallel to the x-axis. It would never pass through it. The only way for a horizontal line to go through the x-axis is if, again, it were right on top of it, and then it would go through the y-axis at 0, 0, and we don't want that to happen. Great, so already half of my answers are eliminated. But I still have two options left. The slope of f could be negative, or the slope of f could be positive. And to choose between these two possible options, I'm going to look at our problem and see if there's any piece of information that we haven't used yet, because I know that by the end of the problem, I am going to want to have used all of the information that I have underlined. And there is a piece of information we haven't used. A plus b equals 0, so I know that this y-coordinate plus this x-coordinate is going to equal 0. A plus b equals 0. And I'm just going to think for a second, what types of numbers can you add together to get 0? I know that both of these can't be positive, because if you add two positive numbers together, you're just going to get a larger positive number. And I know they can't both be negative, because if you add two negative numbers together, you're just going to get a smaller negative number. They have to be able to cancel each other out. So I know that one is going to have to be negative and the other is going to have to be positive. So for example, A could be negative 2, and B could be 2. You could add them, that would get you 0. A could be 3, B could be negative 3. That would get you to 0. And notice here that A and B could both be 0, but the problem specifically says that that's not true. Neither A nor B is 0, so that option is out. One of them has to be positive, the other has to be negative. And now that I know a little bit more about A and B, I'm going to try to draw what line F might possibly look like. It seems like one option for line F is that this A value could be negative and this B value could be positive. So let's say that's true. That means that A over here on our y-axis is negative. So the line passes through a point that's on the negative y-axis. And B is positive, so B is our x-axis, so it passes through a positive point on the x-axis. It goes up like that. And there's another option, right? Our A could be positive and our B could be negative. So if that's true, then it would pass through a positive part of the y-axis, let's say here, and it would pass through a negative part of the x-axis, let's say here. And this line goes up too. So if you look at both of these lines, and if you go from left to right, they're both trending upwards. And you can see that in both of these lines, as your x values go up, your y values are also going up. So both of these lines have positive slopes, which makes me think that the answer is going to be C, that the slope of f has to be positive. And when I think a little bit more about this, this makes a lot of sense. Because if we go from a negative x-intercept to a positive y-intercept, then, well, the y value is changing from 0 to positive, and the x value is changing from negative to 0, so both of these numbers are increasing. And On the other hand, if I'm going from a negative y-intercept to a positive x-intercept, then, well, the y value is going from a negative to 0, and the x value is going to go from 0 to positive. So again, both the y and the x values are increasing, so the slope has to be positive. There's just no way for it not to be.